I was 22 when this happened. At the time, I had just graduated college. I was between jobs and doing odd work around my small town, like babysitting, cleaning houses, running errands, basically anything that paid cash. A woman I dogged for in the past recommended me to a friend of her neighbors, a man named Craig. He called me one afternoon and explained he'd be traveling for a week and needed someone to stay in his house to look after his golden retriever, Max. He said Max was an anxious dog who did best with someone actually staying overnight, rather than just coming by to feed him. And the pay he offered was a little more than usual, so I agreed. I met Craig 2 days later. He was in his late 40s, tall, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a windbreaker. Nothing about him seemed strange at first. Maybe a little overly friendly, but not creepy. His house was on the edge of town, tucked back in a wooded area. The place itself was nice, but a little dated, like with beige carpets and floral curtains. Craig walked me through everything: how often to let Max out, where the spare key was, which fridge items I could use. He told me I could stay in the guest bedroom, which was right off the living room on the first floor. I started the job on a Monday. The first 2 nights were normal. I watched TV in the living room, then took Max on his evening walks, and then slept in the guest room with him, curled up at the foot of the bed. It was the 3rd night when things went wrong. I had been sitting on the bed scrolling through my phone when I noticed something odd. On the dresser across from the bed, next to a small lamp, was a digital alarm clock. I remembered thinking it didn't match the rest of the room. It was newer looking, black plastic with a bright blue LED display, but everything else in the room looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. I don't know what made me look closer. Maybe it was the way the light from the lamp hit the front of it. But as I leaned in, I noticed a small, perfectly round black pinhole above the numbers. At first, I thought it was just a sensor, but then I noticed the angle. The tiny hole was pointed directly at the bed. My stomach dropped. I had read stories about hidden cameras and alarm clocks before, but I'd never actually seen one in person. My mind started racing. I picked it up and it was heavier than I expected, and there was a faint buzzing sound inside, like a tiny fan. I turned it toward me and stared right into the pinhole. That was when Max, who had been lying by the door, suddenly lifted his head and started whining. From somewhere else in the house, not the front door, but deeper inside. I heard the unmistakable sound of a door closing. Every hair on my body stood up. Craig wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday, and it was only Wednesday night. I froze, holding the clock in my hands, my heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. Then I heard slow footsteps on the hallway carpet. I quickly set the clock back down and moved to the door, locking it just as the footsteps stopped outside. Then Craig's voice came through, calm, but slightly out of breath. He was saying he had left something in there the last time he was home and needed me to open the door. I couldn't speak. A moment later, he said it wasn't what I thought, claiming it was a motion sensor for the dog, and that he hadn't wanted to freak me out by mentioning it. I backed away from the door, my hand over my mouth. He told me to come out and that we would talk like adults. But when I didn't respond, his knocking turned into pounding. He yelled at me to open the door with his voice, no longer calm, but sharp and angry. Max started barking and jumping at the door, which only made Craig sound more agitated. I glanced at the window, which was low enough to the ground to climb out, but it was locked. So, I fumbled with the hatch, my hand shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to open it. Behind me, Craig was still pounding, now shouting that if I didn't open the door, he would get the key to the room and call the cops and tell them I broke into his house. I didn't wait to hear more. I shoved the window open, climbed out awkwardly, and dropped onto the grass outside. Max scrambled after me, his nails clicking on the window ledge, but he ultimately gave up and didn't jump out. I ran through the side yard and down the gravel driveway until I reached the road. My phone was in my pocket, and I called my mum, who lived 15 minutes away. I told her to come get me right now. By the time she pulled up, I was hiding behind a cluster of mailboxes. Craig's house was nowhere in sight from that spot, but I kept looking over my shoulder. I stayed at my mum's for the rest of the night. The next morning, I blocked Craig's number and called the lawyer. The lawyer said that without physical proof, like a recording of the camera or the device itself, pressing charges would be difficult. Even if the clock was a hidden camera, Craig could claim it was a harmless motion sensor, and without evidence, it would be my word against his. I wanted to go back and take a picture of it, but my lawyers strongly advised against returning to the house alone. And the idea of seeing Craig again made my skin crawl, so nothing happened to him. I never got paid for the 3 nights I stayed there. The woman who had recommended me to him stopped responding to my messages, and I never found out if she knew anything about him. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about waking up to see a camera lens watching me from across the room. I started checking every clock, smoke detector, and picture frame in my own apartment, and I still think about that moment I looked into that little black lens and the sound of the door closing somewhere behind me in a house I thought was empty, which says to me he may have been in the house the whole time watching me through that camera.